afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Addendum with me, Agent Bill Lane. We offer you a bit of a review of the US Army. Yes, indeed, an Army review. What do I think of it? Why do I think of it? Because of so and so and so on. You know, just trying to give you my thoughts here on the Army, its purpose, its utility, how much is actually worth, and what do I sort of initially think the meta game might actually be sort of early on. Since of course patches will likely invariably touch upon that and sort of change that overall. Still, what do I think of this army? And overall, sort of just out of say my initial thoughts on it. It's actually a pretty fun army. It's a very well put together army in many regards, and it's actually a pretty interesting one. It's also in many regards something that touches upon some historical aspects of the army. And, it's actually got a series of rather interesting and unique mechanics, which does overall make it for a very fun army. And overall, one of those things one sort of has to touch upon is the fact that, the base is already built. The United States Army there's all basically plonks down this entire thing for every match. You don't have to build a single building, you don't have to worry about placement. So that, for starters, already there makes things sort of interesting. And also one thing, interesting thing is, you also have access to weapon racks, which is something no other army has as well. So in that regard, the US Army starts out with some pretty interesting bonuses, and, action sort of thing is you unlock them by upgrades, so it's basically a bit like some case for some armies was previously. But here's the thing then, you'll basically afterwards then just walk up, grab the weapon, pay the munition, and that's it. So unlike any other army, for example, you don't have to bother with the time to get the weapon. You just, you're on the base, grab the weapon, move on. Of course, you can upgrade on the field, but on the hand, instantaneous pretty much sort of covers it. Plus, it gives you one other massive advantage, and this is one of sort of the great advantages of the United States Army, and that is you can upgrade anyone with a weapon. Anyone, any infantry unit, you can grab a weapon here from the racks, though mind you this one is structural, they're like machine gun weapons, but otherwise. Riflemen, you can basically sort of fit them how you want. Do you want a BAR bazooka or LMG bazooka? That way you have a bit of infantry anti-infantry armor. Good job. There you go. Do you want to focus? Double down on bazookas. Double down on BAR for infantry or LMGs for infantry as well. Or for example, again, the rear echelon troops. Again, normally the lowest quality of troops is really not be much use with any armor. But for the Americans, hey, they can just create a support team. Again, I don't want to sacrifice anti-infantry firepower from my better units. Well then, use the rear echelon troops to create a bazooka team. That kind of thing, really. So in that regard, the American infantry also ends up being the most flexible infantry in the history of competitive heroes. Flexible beyond your imagining, flexible beyond your reckoning, because you can also use it on, doctrinal troops. They can also gain these benefits. And again, that's pretty damn unique. Some doctrinal troops, of course, will have their own upgrades. So, of course, in that regard, there'll be some, similarities with other armies. But at the same time, you can easily then sort of further, specialize them again, depending on the situation goes. Oh, lots of armor. Well, I suppose I'll equip my assault engineers with bazookas as well. So, there are some things in that regard that already there stand out when it comes to dealing with the United States forces here. And that all again also makes it a very interesting army in many regards. Certainly, of course, also the infantry, the basic riflemen. Of course, I'll be doing a propaganda cast later on that. A little training video still. They're a bit unique. They're the most expensive, but overall in certain regards, they're also probably the best unit right out of the bag. They're sort of initially in the game. So that's also something to keep in mind, though, mind you, they're not bulletproof. No matter what United States propaganda might have you to believe. Which probably isn't that. So, of course, already there are some things that rather make them unique, and of course, also the way you tech up, then it's also massively unique as well. You don't, tech up as such, you train a unit. You activate it, and then you get a unit and officer. And that applies for every building, and the officers sort of differ in abilities and combat skills as well, so in that regard, they also provide something pretty different as well in that aspect. And I also think, personally, makes the United States Army probably the easier faction to get into, because overall, thanks to the barracks, for example, these upgrades, you can much easier react to say, oh dear, I made a bad teching decision. Well, I'll not entirely bug it, because I can get a bazooka. Oh well, I can get some BARs to sort of that way cover up for things. So in that regard, there are some things. And of course, even then, when you take up compared to any other army, you get something out of it besides just access to the tech. You don't have to worry about building the building. It's there. I already have it. Plus, you get a unit. No armor just gets a unit. So in that regard, it's certainly a lot easier, I think, for the novices to get into, because again, you don't have to worry so much about taking decisions. They won't bite you as hard in the arse as they might with some other armies. Of course, I mean, you still have to be careful with your units, but they do also provide some interesting things. For example, here the platoon command post besides the lieutenant offers the utility car, sort of like a downgraded Greyhound from the first game, has a 50 caliber, can lay down anti-tank mines and such. You got the 50 caliber, one of the best machine guns in the game, heavier. You got the AA half-track, an absolutely lethal killing machine, and taking up further, you get the anti-tank gun there, a light howitzer, light tanks, and then finally you get here with the M4 Sherman, the M36, which is probably also one of the best tank destroyers sort of mobility-wise in the game, and you also get a sort of light self-propelled artillery piece. I mean, overall, the United States Army does offer quite a few options there, and overall, you basically just need to sort of have either these first two there, and then you can actually move up there, so to a certain extent, the teching is also a bit fluid. So in that regard, the United States Army is a very mobile, a very flexible army. Of course, it also then lacks pretty much in heavy armor, which of course is a bit of a sort of nasty thing for some players, because, you know, you might find yourself sort of less capable of slugging out in some regards, but again, you know, that's sort of the cost you have to pay for having that kind of army in some regards, flexible and mobile. You know, it can't be too tough either that easily, otherwise it would get a bit silly. So of course that is also something very vital, very important to keep in mind while playing the United States Army. You're not going to be sort of, you know, slugging out. You won't be playing with Panthers, Tigers, IS-2s or the likes. You'll be playing with Shermans, Jacksons, Wolverines and what not. But if you understand that, of course, then you also understand in many regards, again, you know, it's a very flexible army. And again, it does offer you a lot of choice and a lot of potent choices. Another thing to also keep in mind is most of the units generally tend to have an abundance of abilities, which also rather marks them out. So again, there's a very high degree of flexibility on practically every level of the United States forces compared to any other army, which again also makes it pretty unique. So I mean, in that regard, again, yes, you might not be playing around with heavy armor, but you do possess a lot of flexibility, a lot of tools to sort of quickly then sort of sort out the situation compared to any other army. So again, something very good to keep in mind. Of course, the doctrines to a certain extent also play into this as well. And this is of course just sort of one part of it. And sort of we'll just sort of quickly move on there to sort of explain something else. Moving on to actually some bit more about the officers, then the armor, and maybe a slight conclusion. So a bit more on the officers. I mean, the lieutenant, of course, you know, basically just is a rifleman score with some slightly boosted combat capabilities to a larger extent. But for some, the captain always then sort of shows off other abilities supervise all on me, which allows me to actually sort of call troops to him and actually boost them slightly for a brief while as well. So we're also having a bit of handy ability and also equipped with 2 bazookas. So in that regard, you know, officers can also serve a sort of quick reaction force in that regard as well. And finally, you got the major here, sort of ability, sort of not quite a combat unit, though again you can always put some weapons on him, but also, you know, calls in artillery, air reconnaissance, a really powerful officer really. So also they're quite handy. In that regard, you know, a good understanding of the officers also really sort of, you know, helps you as a player, but again, you know, also makes the United States Army very interesting, because, you know, officers really haven't been made that integral before to the game, yet all of a sudden, you know, here they are with the United States Army. Though to a certain extent one would imagine them with the Germans, since they are put a lot of emphasis on their commanders as well, on their officers on the field. Of course, that's another discussion. And of course, you've got the armor, you've got the vehicle, and again, you've got one really, really nifty little feature with them, and that's the vehicle crew. Unlike any other army, the Americans actually have sort of a separate crew for the vehicles where they can pop up, the crew can fight, the crew can actually quickly repair their tanks as well, which also makes, in that regard, the United States Army even more flexible, because you can just, you know, say, oh dear, my tank got in a fight, I can pull it out, and then have the crew repair it, or say the engine was damaged, you can have them pop out, fix the issue, and then pull back for further repairs as well. Which in many regards, you know, makes them really, really flexible compared to any armor, because again, they can much faster fix any technical issues they sort of suffer, well, engine or damage issues they suffer from the opponent, overall making for something very nasty. Plus, of course, again, you know, the whole flexibility of abilities. Again, a lot more abilities than any other army you might have for their vehicles as well, or at least usually have. And of course, you can also try and sort of time it correctly to maybe save the crew even if the vehicle is lost. Though, of course, you then might want to avoid your opponent stealing it that way, but again, a large degree of flexibility, unlike any other army. And that really seems to be sort of the call name here for the Americans. They are flexible beyond belief. They're also mobile to a large degree, though interesting enough they do not have a transportation vehicle except doctrinally to sort of facilitate that, which is actually a bit unique since you'd figure they'd have more of that to sort of make them further mobile, but that of course is another story. One thing there to note in terms of healing and such, they are reliant on a specific medical ambulance to actually provide healing for them, which is a bit more costly in some regards. Also provides some sort of a point for reinforcement out in the field, so that is also something to keep in mind with the Americans. They don't have medic stations, medic bunkers, or anything like that. They have an ambulance to take care of that, so that is also vital to keep in mind while using the Americans. And overall, an understanding of that, of course, will provide you with quite a few benefits. And then sort of slight part here, the last part of the review, moving on to that sort of further heavier look on the armor available to the Americans. And again, armor wise, very much, you know, firepower, mobility and certain flexibility, but not again so much durability. Again, the Jackson tank destroyer, high range, high damage, not a lot of armor nor a lot of health, so it's not something you actually want to slug out with any enemy armor with. On the other hand, you can sort of flank them, you got a pretty good chance. And of course, doctrinally, there are also some fun units like the 105mm Sherman, the Wolverine tank destroyer, which both offer some bits as well, either some flanking speed or some higher armor piercing rounds to sort of, you know, further aid their ability to basically penetrate your opponent's armor. Sort of adds a lot. And again, the major here, which can also serve as a forward retreat point, which can then be combined with, say, an ambulance. So again, you know, some rather interesting abilities of working together. And Sherman tanks also possessing a unique ability which boosts them when friendly tanks are nearby. Again, some rather unique abilities. And of course, I mean, compared to, say, some of the older armies, they also possess an overall more varied set of veterancy abilities when they do have them. So I mean, overall, when you look at them, the United States forces are extremely flexible, rather mobile, though not fully mobile. They still need some transportation sort of more properly for that, but still, you know, possesses quite a few sort of abilities to sort of get around on the battlefield, do a lot of damage, avoid, and such. I mean, overall, a pretty solid army, a pretty interesting army, and I think, again, also an army that's easier to get into than probably any other army. Of course, they could be proven wrong, and certainly I would be a bit sad if that was the case. But overall, I hopes this serves sort of a good review, a sort of good overview of the army. I mean, overall, in terms of sort of meta game, I mean, there's overall a lot of ways the Americans can go with the armor with the assault engineers. Some tank destroyers and the 105mm Sherman is certainly reasonably popular. Though again, airborne is as well, and even the infantry offers some things. I mean, overall, there's quite a few sort of choices, a few abilities. I will, by the way, be doing a review video on the American commands as well later on, so don't worry about that. Not touching so much upon them here, but you know, I will go into depth with that as well later on. So don't worry, my dear viewers, don't worry. But again, you know, if you were to ask me, you know, should I get this army? I mean, you know, if you like some flexibility, if you like some mobility, you just want to play with the Americans, knock yourselves out. You'll probably have loads of fun, and even if you're new to the game again, I suspect you won't be having such a hard time with the Americans compared to any other army. So overall, you'd probably not be disappointed in this army unless you're expecting Germans or Russians, in which case, of course, you know, this might not be what you're looking for. But this is Imperial Dane saying cheers, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe, share it with everyone, you know, let everybody know this. Of course, you know, comments and feedback in the video section, comment section is always, of course, welcome. Anyways, this is Imperial Dane saying cheers, and see you another time.